David Yu who lead this exhibition and devoted a great deal of time and energy to its security. Without him, the exhibition would not have been possible. David, please stand up, because I want to suggest we give him a big round of applause. Finally, I would like to thank Zhou Fengsuo, Jin Yan, Yu Jinghua, Shen Liqun, Zheng Xuguang, and other friends who provide a lot of support for this exhibition. In particular, I would like to thank the young volunteers who are still out there working, and it's very encouraging to have the young generation on board. Now I would like to invite Ambassador Bremberg to share his speech. Ambassador Bremberg is the president and the CEO of the Victim of Communism Memorial Foundation. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Victims of Communism Museum. I haven't had a chance to say that a lot yet. They're only been open for a whole another week. So thank you and welcome again. We're so honored to have you all here with us, and we're so deeply grateful to have this exhibit that we can open out to the world and all that come to the museum. As you've heard, the Tiananmen 1989 is the most extensive exhibit ever mounted or presented in the United States about the Chinese people's heroic struggle for democracy in 1989. We would especially like to thank the June 4 Massacre Memorial Association for their tremendous work in putting together this very powerful exhibit. As I said, we are so proud as the Victims of Communism Museum that this will be the first temporary exhibit as our museum opens just in a week and a half. For the free world, 1989 is frequently remembered as the year of miracles, where the Berlin Wall fell and led to the Soviet Union crumbling. But in China, it showed the brutal lengths that the Chinese Communist Party was willing to go, slaughtering its own citizens to preserve its own power. Sadly, we are still living in the aftermath of the fateful night in June 1989. And it's for this reason that we still commemorate this appalling tragedy today. We stand in solidarity with the millions across China who were impacted by that event and continue to suffer in silence at the hands of an all-encompassing power of the state. We also stand in solidarity in a particular way with the people of Hong Kong, who until recently were the only people in all of China who could commemorate this day's events, free from state repression. Since 1989, Hong Kongers have mourned those who have lost their lives during the annual vigil at Victoria Park. But this will be the second year that no such vigil will take place now, because the CCP has snuffed out any dissent in their one-party rule as they crushed democracy in Hong Kong. As we hold this reception for the launch of this powerful exhibit, we remember that any mention of the massacre will be erased in the country where it happened. The Tiananmen Museum in Hong Kong has been shuttered, the Goddess of Democracy statues torn down, and that is why it is so important for us to honor those who stood for freedom and to educate future generations about what took place. Thank you again for joining us today to honor the memory and remember the victims of the Tiananmen Square Massacre and the brave heroes who have resisted tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party for years. And we look forward to seeing many of you this evening at the Victims of Communism Memorial by the Capitol as we commemorate our own candlelight vigil tonight at 8 p.m. Thank you so much.
Congressman's news would like to come, but he just sent a message and he unfortunately will be unable to attend as he has scheduled in his district, but we have Bureau Posey, Republican staff director of Continental's Human Rights Commission. He will be delivering a remark on his behalf.
I'm going to speak on behalf of Congressman Smith, as you just heard, so you have to hear my voice, but speak with Mr. Smith, please. So thank you. Today, we remember, on this, as the 33rd anniversary approaches, the infamous Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, where over 1 million peaceful protesters had gathered at the center of Beijing to challenge the Chinese Communist Party's suppression of freedom, human rights, and democracy. Instead of being welcomed as a true voice of the people, these brave heroes of China were slain by soldiers who fired into the peaceful crowd, crushed by tanks that ran over idealistic students and youth. These student-led protests that began earlier in April of the same year symbolized a landmark rejection of communism in the post-Mao era, while smaller demonstrations rippled in over 400 different cities. With the eyes of the world upon the students in the square, beginning on June 3rd and then June 4th, the communist regime bared its claws as unarmed demonstrators and supportive bystanders, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, were brutally beaten, arrested, or killed after then President Yang Shangkun, along with Premier Li Peng, declared martial law and mobilized 300,000 troops. The aftermath of the CCP's violent suppression was sickening, and the memory of the noble and courageous demonstrators lives on in our memory today, and some of whom are with us here today. I'm staring at a couple of these heroes right now. On this day, we remember more than 10,000 innocent people who were killed and the thousands more who were wounded. We remember those forced into exile and those who remain disappeared. We send our most sincere condolences to the families that still suffer today from their loved ones' sacrifices. We remember and honor all the ordinary citizens who peacefully stood against the most violent, godless ideology in history, communism. As the Chinese government refuses to commemorate this event, as we just heard, even in Hong Kong, that commemoration is suppressed, and has seemingly erased this date from history books, Mr. Smith and others in Congress, and I myself and my staff that's here at the Land Coast Commission, will never forget the June 4th massacre. Nor will you. It is you who will write the true annals of what transpired 33 years ago, who will write what will be read by posterity. This regime cannot stifle the truth from being told, and the more it attempts to do so, the more it will hasten its own downfall, because as we know, heaven sees with the eyes of the people and hears with the ears of the people. And let us all recall the horror we felt when we first saw and heard the news of that fateful day. We should feel that same outrage and violation today and every day, for that same regime is in power, and the repression of the Chinese people by its rulers has gotten even worse. Now, since Mr. Smith has been in Congress, Xi Jinping has tightened his grip on human rights, civil liberties, and universally recognized freedoms. Today, the Chinese Communist Party continues to commit genocide and crimes against humanity, as millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other ethnic minorities are held in concentration camps against their will, forced to labor, and condemned into sexual slavery. We know that Uyghurs and other minorities and religious dissidents, like Falun Gong practitioners, and let's not forget the Han Chinese who suffer from this regime, are having their organs harvested. At the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission hearing that we held last month, with tremendous help from the Victims of Communism Foundation, our witnesses confirmed cases of forced organ harvesting dating back to the 1990s. Our witnesses also documented from Chinese sources how the CCP has grossly falsified organ donor registry data. Now, as ranking member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, as well as co-chair of the Tom Lantis Human Rights Commission, Mr. Smith has led numerous hearings, I think it's over 74 on human rights in China, on forced sterilization, population control, coerced abortions. He's drafted critical legislation to champion liberty in China and to hold this rogue regime accountable. His most recent bipartisan legislation, H.R. 7193, the China Trade Relations Act of 2022, that he introduced in March of this year with Tom Suozzi of New York and Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin, looks to strip China of its permanent normal trade relations status until it makes true progress on human rights. And his Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Bill of 1592 that Mr. Smith introduced along with Tom Cotton in the Senate aims to prohibit the transfer of organ transplant surgery devices to those who take part in this horrific practice and sanction those who are culpable, while imposing mandatory reporting on human organ trafficking in China and elsewhere. Now, more than ever, such legislation is needed. We cannot acquiesce in the face of evil. We cannot be neutral when it comes to the grossest violations of human rights and barbaric cruelty inflicted upon the Chinese people by its own rulers. China remains a totalitarian dictatorship, a society stripped of the rights granted by heaven. That will change. Today, we commemorate the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre, living and dead. It is they who speak from the grave and from exile to the next generation. It is they, it is you, who represent the true China, the China that we all hope one day will be restored. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
And now we are going to deliver a video from Senator Beck.